George has 3 minutes.
Thank you.
Get ready. Everybody's ringers off? Ringers off? We'll call the Tuesday, December 10th, 2024 meeting to order. We'll start with roll call.
Councilmember Karen.
Here.
Booyah.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Hunslus.
Here.
Spooner.
Here.
Steele.
Here.
Mayor Bracek.
Here, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the States of America. Public for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible.
Thank you. Need a motion and a second to approve the agenda if there's no changes.
So move.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Dumbia, seconded by Councilmember Von Sluis. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. We have no presentations or introductions today, so we'll move on to approving the minutes of the November 26, 2024 City Council meeting. Anybody have any changes or corrections that need to be made to that? Seeing none, I would take a motion in a second.
So move. Second.
Motion by Councilmember Ross, seconded by Councilmember Teal. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. And we have one request to be heard tonight. Mr. George Wickstrom. Move up to the microphone there and we'll get your 3 minutes going. It's hot.
Well, thank you for allowing me the time, and I'd like to share some things with you that I don't think are well known or paid attention to about very many people. I'm 94 years old. I've been in the financial services business, investments and life insurance for 47 years, and I've studied the economy for a long time. I'm going to say right now that our economic problems in this country today are probably not solvable. We've gone too far in debt, and we have too many unfunded liabilities. Now, let me know when the minute and a half is up, if you will, so I know where I'm going. But our economic problems started right after World War II. See, this country has always been about 4.5% of the world's population. And we are pretty close to that day. It may have varied up and down 1 or 0.2%, pretty much in the average 4.5. 4.5% of the world had all of the developed world countries that were bombed out in World War II. There was about 15 or 16 countries that were totally bombed out. They needed help. What else did we do? We had things like when President Eisenhower was in, we put in 41,000 miles of roads. In 1948 Clean Water Act, we put sewer and water systems all over the country. But none of these things did we set any money aside for repairs or replacement. 36% of the bridges in this country are in need of repair or replacement. There's over 200,000. There's no money to fix them. What does the government do? They sell bonds and they print money, debt and inflation. Most of the inflation that we're getting today comes from the federal government. You could buy a loaf of bread when I was a kid for a dime. Now it's $3.50 or $4. That's 35, 40%. A very nice car for $2,000 in 1947, 1 minute, okay, is now 40, 50,000. See, that's what's happening to us. So now, what do we need to also understand? We've changed our style of living tremendously. When I was a kid, it was all about wants, not about needs. I'm sorry, about needs. People were more concerned about having enough money to pay for food and the house, lodging or rent, and getting to work. That was about it. Very little time for vacation. We had a 1-week vacation when I was a kid. That was it. But now, what kind of things are we doing today? The Icon of the Seas is the largest cruise ship we've got in the world. 7,950 passengers and crew, 4.5 times the size of the Titanic. So 40% of our gross domestic product is going into things of that kind. It's unsustainable. What we're doing today as an economy is unsustainable. Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve President, was on 60 Minutes about 3 months ago. I didn't hear the program, but I saw a replay of it. He said our debt is unsustainable, and it is totally unsustainable. The unfunded liabilities for Social Security alone are $73 trillion. And why is that? Well, because when it was put in place in 1935, life expectancy for a 65-year-old normal retirement was 6 to 8 years. They moved that up to 67. 67-year-old has 17, 18-year life expectancy. So those are the kinds of things we need to worry about. So when you folks are planning for expenditures, keep in mind where the money's coming from. The federal government is broke, but they will print money for Social Security bonds, and they'll print money. Time up? That's enough. That's all I've got to say. Thank you for listening. And one more thing. My phone number is 507-323-5239. If anybody wants to talk about this with me, I'll buy you supper. I'll buy you lunch. We can meet and because this is serious stuff.
Thank you, George. Your knowledge is unprecedented. Thank you for your knowledge is unprecedented. Thank you for reminding us. Yep. Absolutely. All right. We'll move on to consent agenda. Item 6A through 6K. Anybody have anything they want pulled for discussion?
Mayor Voracek.
Councilmember Ross.
I'll make a motion to approve consent agenda items 6A through 6K.
Motion by Councilmember Ross, seconded by Councilmember Dumbia. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. We'll move on to public hearings tonight. We have a number of them. Are you going to take them in groups or one at a time? How do you want to do this?
So I have a presentation prepared that kind of covers everything.
Okay?
And then, yeah,
Okay, so we'll take public hearings on all the items 7A through 7H in one presentation, and then we will talk about it at the council. Then we'll go out for public discussion on this item for our public hearing, and then we'll bring it back to the council for closing. So, okay, Director Kinzer.
okay. Thank you, Mayor Voracek. Some of this will look familiar as I took last year's presentation and used some of it, but also made a little bit of it my own. So tonight we are here to take the last steps on the 2025 budget, which really started in May, essentially with staff looking at capital requests, looking at personnel requests, looking at year-to-date budget and last year's actuals, and really getting those things started. And so we are here tonight with the resolutions, 8 different resolutions before you, which were mostly discussed at the December 3rd work session. So things that we discussed last Tuesday really do coincide here. And so I've kind of have the presentation set up to kind of go through some of these kind of grouping by grouping, but feel free to ask any questions as you go. And there are some different graphs and things that are small, so I did print the copy of the presentation for you so that you'd have that information in front of you if it's too small on the screen. So these are the 8 resolutions that we have tonight, and just kind of talking first about the property tax levy. This is a graphic that you probably remember seeing over the summer or in September, where we talked about how do we figure out like what do we have for money, and it's really everything starts with the county assessor and determining that market value. And so kind of throughout the summer, summer and fall, we emailed the county assessor's office to just get those initial numbers and see if there's any changes and kind of where things go. And as the county is, finalizing those numbers, that's when we're also figuring out what do we need in the different areas where we have property taxes that are levied. And so then once we figure out that amount, that's when it's that net market value that is really using to take what we need in terms of a whole dollar amount to figure out what that rate is for the next year. So just a little look at where we were or where we are in the current year compared to where we'll be next year. So our net tax capacity did decrease by about 1.5 million. Our levy amount also increased by 1.5 million. And the tax rate did jump to by basically 2.8%. So the total tax rate that we're looking at for this year is just below 50%. So that means of that total taxable net tax capacity, we're using just about half of it to fund operations, debt service, and a few different other things. One thing that I kind of find interesting that we've talked about is that we're still seeing growth in our net tax capacity, 930,000, but in 2024 it was 2.2 million. So things are slowing down from where things kind of hit a high in 2022 of some housing inflation that really impacted the values in a way that the city saw some tremendous spikes in things. I do also want to point out that our new construction amount was about 350,000, which turns out to be a little more than 1/3 of that total new growth that we saw. So, and I would say that's mostly from the residential sector. That is happening. So there are some interesting things kind of in the data as a whole. I did update this chart to just talk about the taxable market value and kind of go back to the, our value is climbing, but when you look at the kind of orangish yellow line there, that's that percent growth. It really was 2023 was when things really peaked out in terms of growth as a percent, and now we're starting to kind of slide back. So I think, there's still a positive here of we're seeing increased growth. But it is definitely kind of slowing down from where it was a few years ago. And the same can be said about when we look at the next net tax capacity change as well. It's very much a similar picture where we're still seeing growth. It's just at a much slower rate than what it was just 2 years ago. And so when we start talking about preliminary levy versus final tax levy, which I think is very helpful because the preliminary levy is what was on the truth and taxation notice and was what went out to the general public. There were some differences that were all in a very positive direction for the taxpayers between what we actually have for you to vote on tonight and what went out in that truth and taxation notice. And so as you'll recall, last week was really when we made a big changes and kind of talking about the local government aid and how to apply that, which is a majority of the change in the general fund. And then community and economic development was just some wage adjustments and benefit adjustments that we didn't have in September, but we had here in November. And then the debt service change was a direct conversation or direct result from our conversation last week. So we are down 2.57% from where we were at the preliminary levy time to 12.11% for 2025. And I thought it's always interesting to look at kind of where we've been. When you look at what is 12.11%, it's for recent history. It is a larger increase than we've had in past years. You can kind of see how it's, again, the yellow line to look at is where we've been basically in that 6-7% range. And so things do look a little different there. However, when you look at, 20 years of history or 20 or more, because we do have spreadsheets with that data. There were definitely some years back in 2008 and prior to 2008 where there were 15 to 36% tax levy increases. And so those things did happen. Some of you might remember those. So it's kind of all about where is your perspective and what are you looking at as a point of comparison. When we look at the tax rate, that 49.5% for 2025, kind of looking at the prior 5 years, you can see we're definitely higher than 23 and 24, but actually lower than 2020, 21, and 2022. So I would say if you start thinking about what is the average of those, which I'll just tell you I didn't calculate, but it looks like we're kind of right in the average of what the prior 5 years had been. And so what does this mean on sort of residential properties? And basically, it's essentially a 5.77% increase that would range, depending on market value, from essentially $34 kind of at the low end of a market value of 150,000. And I should say, typically market value less homestead exemption or any other exemptions you might have. Up to about $93 on 350,000. One great way for people to actually see what that impact looks like for them, especially with that truth and taxation notice in hand, that actually has the taxable market value, which is the market value less any exemptions that you'd have. And so on our website, we do have our budget receipt that we have put for created with Polco. And that basically breaks down and tells you of your taxable value and your net market value or taxable market value, how much actually goes to the various things that the city has on our tax levy. And so I will just share that has not been updated to reflect the changes in the general fund that we talked about the other night that are actually up here for approval. But Brad and I will be meeting tomorrow to make those updates. And so that's where we would encourage people to continue to look at that budget receipt and get a really good idea of what your dollars that you're paying towards the city actually are going for. And I think Brad gave the stat today that there have been more than 600 clicks on that web page so far. So we hope that people are out there and using it. On the commercial side, it's again a 5.77% increase, looking at on the kind of the low end of an estimated market value of $115 additional up to, if we're looking at a market value of $5 million, looking at $2,680. So also included in our actions tonight is taking action on the HRA and the EDA resolutions. The Housing and Redevelopment Authority and the Economic Development Authority have both requested the maximum amount, and as we've gone along, that's kind of been where our discussions have been on those two different levies. And so it equals $416,000 for the HRA and $408,000. And we talked about last week, we had kind of an overview of what those budgets look like, and we'll touch on those briefly a little bit more when we talk about special revenue funds. So that's kind of the property tax levy in a nutshell. The next resolution is dealing with our budget appropriations, which actually says this is what we are setting. These are the numbers that we are using to formally set a budget based on not only the property tax levy, but all the work that we've done throughout the multiple months of the budget process. And so I wanted to start with the general fund. And so basically in the general fund right now, we have revenues and expenditures that are the same. So we're at $22,818,656. That does leave out $220,000 of the LGA, as we talked about, to address some future needs in 2025. That funding would be in our intergovernmental, which is the gray on the pie chart there. But I think the interesting thing, which we have talked about quite a bit as we've gone through this process, is that our budget is heavily dependent on property taxes and local government aid, making up 87% of the revenue that we have coming in. It's the other things, permits and licenses and fines and charges for service really are minimal when it comes to other revenues besides property taxes and LGA. When we look at the expenditure side, we kind of have something that I would say is probably not surprising, and if I did some asking around of some of our comparable cities, I would guess we'd be pretty comparable. Public safety is our largest expenditure in the general fund at 47%, or just about 10.6 million, a little over 10.6 million. Coming in number 2 is culture and recreation, which is really all things community center, parks, recreation, and the library. And then you have Public Works and General Government, kind of in there, tied at that 15% mark in that $3.4 million range. And so when I did compare what this looks like to what 2024 looked like, public safety increased 2%, while Public Works and General Government each dropped 1%. Another thing that we kind of talked about throughout the budget process, but I never put good numbers together, is how much of the budget is made up and the general fund is made up of personnel. Personnel is by far and away our biggest cost. So not just your salaries, but your benefits and everything there as well. So for 2025, 16.8 million of that 22.8 is personnel costs. That's 74% of our total budget. As I said, I don't think that's going to be far off from what other cities are at. I think this is probably a pretty standard look, but I think the bigger thing to take forward as a picture moving forward is, there's very few places to think about making reductions in the general fund at any point that doesn't hit personnel. A lot of the non-personnel costs are contracts where we're obligated to do something, or other just things that you need to operate. So we didn't get into a lot of that other stuff, and I didn't do the breakdown between services and supplies, but that's kind of just generally where things break down. So there's about 6 million that really is all that other stuff that is out there in the budget. When we switch to special revenue funds, I will just share this as in your packet, as well as kind of a larger spreadsheet. So I highlighted in yellow the items that are on the tax levy, tax abatement. It's an in and an out. So we collect the money that we are going to abate for different entities where there are agreements with them, and essentially pay that out throughout the year. Community and Economic Development, we have multiple staff members in that department. What we have coming in for more revenues than expenditures is there is a small deficit from 2023 that we're addressing with the tax levy in 2025 to hopefully get that fund back to a positive position in a shorter amount of time. So generally, each fund has a set budget that is out there. I'll just highlight too, the airport is one area where we've got a lot of significant projects that'll take place in 2025, which are mostly funded through federal resources, through the FAA or the MnDOT Aeronautics Department, and it's just using a small amount of fund balance to get, I think about $1.5 million to $2 million worth of work done. Kind of moving on to our next set of special revenue funds, we have a lot of TIF funds, which will be out there, basically money in, money out, less our 10%. And then highlighting the HRA and the EDA. Just as a reminder from the presentation, both are planning some pretty active projects and special programs in 2025. So that's where the funding, the expenses are elevated a little bit more there than the revenues to try and spend down some dollars that weren't spent in prior years on some projects. The next component of our budget appropriation is our debt service. Our tax levy portion of this is 1.3 million, almost 1.4 million, but the total revenues is higher. And then just as a reminder, the total with our debt service, we are, for those that we have outside agreements on, we are required to have that 10% sort of cushion. And so that's where you see the expenditures being about $200,000 less. And so we'll have future conversations about what happens with that funding. I did go ahead and update on this chart the payment schedule that we talked about for the internal capital loan. And so you can see what that looks like in sort of the short term and the long term there as well. And so I like this. It really shows that, we're paying our debt off quickly. You can see next year we're going to have a bump in our debt service. And then, really after 2026, things start to decrease at a pretty good pace. And for Councilmember Ross, I believe this is the graph that he asked about multiple times, and I wanted to make sure I got this in there that really showed if nothing else happens, and of course we know that there are other discussions to have about a multitude of items in future budgets, as well as in 2025 on some community priorities like the community center, Viaduct Park, other things. Any future decisions are going to change this, but as it stands now, 2034 would be when things would be paid off. And to follow up from our conversation last week and a point that Councilmember Teal brought up, I really think what this graph shows is that if you would want to, if a future council would want to take up that internal loan and adjust that payment schedule to accelerate some of those payments, there would certainly be some capacity to do that, probably as early as 2028, to be able to kind of prevent that huge drop in the debt service there and hopefully repay the general fund a little bit sooner. So I think this looks good for where we are right now, and I think knowing next year it's going to be a bump up again. Hopefully we won't have some of the same issues with kind of other high tax needs that we would have on the tax levy as well. Okay, so just getting into some capital projects, we're going to talk about these kind of with the CAP, but we have 4 capital project funds that really encompass all street improvements, those park projects that are considered capital, as well as equipment replacement in public facilities. We talked about all of these pretty in depth on October 15th, and there really has been nothing that has changed in any of these, and we'll go through them a little bit in depth a little bit later. The enterprise funds were ones that we also talked about kind of in depth and had a conversation about rates and things. So the enterprise funds, basically they're business type funds. They are supposed to operate on user fees to fund operations and maintenance, capital, debt payments, anything like that. And so we did look at the financial model for rates with some of the capital and proposed operations and maintenance expenses for not only this year, but on a 10-year look. And that's where 2025 was calling for a 3% increase on water, a 2% increase on sewer, and a 10% on stormwater, which is, I think it was 89 cents per month when I went back and checked that. You can see where we're at kind of on all of these. The water fund is the only one that's not using up a significant amount of fund balance in 2025, and we'll talk about that here momentarily as well. So getting into the water fund specifically, there's a chart that compares kind of the base rate. We have kind of a two-tiered system. We have a two-tiered system where there's a base rate that everybody pays regardless of what their usage is. And then there's a per gallon fee that is based on consumption levels. And so those all increased by 3%, as you can see there. When we're looking at, that total budget of nearly $8 million, you can see 4.8 of that is capital. As we went through the capital improvement plan process, as well as looking at the rate table and the financial model, it's in order to fund the capital for water for not only this year, but for next year as well, there will need to be a loan of about $4.7 million that would need to be pursued. I've talked with Northland Securities, who is our financial advisor on that, and as well as Mark and Travis. And I think we're going to be able to wait pretty close till May before we would need to probably have any of those funds to be undertaking the process of borrowing for those. And so Northland Securities will make recommendations, and we'll be able to talk more about that at that time. So that's not anything that you need to take action on at this point, but the budget that is before you tonight does have that debt service built into it. Sewer was a 2% increase, and so it took base rates that everybody pays from $10.20 a month to $10.40 a month. The flow charge also increased along with our significant industrial users and their fees, and things also increased by 2%. We're a lot heavier on the operations and maintenance side of this. That operations and maintenance number includes both the collection system, which we treat as its own department and has its own supervisor, as well as the wastewater reclamation facility is kind of its own thing. So those are all rolled up into the numbers that you have there before you. We also have some debt service there, about 1.5 million that we'll be making in this next year as well, and then just under $3 million in proposed capital, of which cash on hand and rates will be funding. Stormwater, an 88-cent per month increase per residential lot equivalent. This is, again, a much smaller budget. There are some staffing allocations that come out of there, but there's no debt service. We do have a fairly aggressive capital plan of 1.8 million, which is, when we get into the capital, you'll see it's really not a lot of independent projects. It's a lot of things that are built on other things happening. So we're looking at a budget of just under 2.5 million there, with most of that being capital. And then we will get into the capital improvement plan is in your packet, or there's a summary in your packet. And so I just wanted to hit some highlights of things for you to think about and to just make sure that are out there kind of publicly. So street improvement fund, when we talk about where are revenues in this fund, we're really looking at franchise fees from both external and internal sources, municipal state aid, special assessments, and then interest. There is a fund balance here in this fund that is earning interest. And as we look at what we have ahead, we've got a very aggressive year for 2025 planned of about $4.7 million in improvements between 4 kind of different broad projects. And then you can see that number goes down significantly in the following years. And then we'll talk more, of course, as we go forward about utilizing the local funds essentially to help support some of our state aid contributions. Park improvement. So our major projects that we have here, I think it's one we've talked about a lot. Viaduct Park, that is underway, and so we're estimating there will be between 2024 2025 6.3 million. That internal loan, was approved many months ago, and we're probably going to initiate it here in 2025. I think we'll be able to carry ourselves through where we can initiate it in that time frame. But we also have some other big projects. Deer Bridge is one that we'll start some design on in 2025 and reconstruct in 2026. North Alexander parking lot is North Alexander parking lot number 2 is one that's going to be improved, and then we'll see some sidewalk improvements in 25-26 coming out of the park improvement fund. And then just to note, something that happens that is programmed in every year now is $100,000 for playground equipment replacement, as well as then $25,000 to $30,000 for trail maintenance. And so with this, we have, again, franchise fees, parkland dedication fees when we do receive those, as well as some interest, and then bond or internal loan proceeds. Capital equipment fund 431 is the one we spent the most time talking about, because this is the one, it's the last resolution on your list related to approving the internal loan and that amortization schedule for that internal loan to finance our 1.9 million expenditures in 2025. And so this fund also has some public safety aid, also has some local government aid to support the software transition with Tyler Technologies, as well as some different franchise fees. And then we do charge on some of these projects where they might, cross over into our enterprise funds. We do charge those enterprise funds for their contribution. So you can see what we have planned for 2025, some significant items, and we'll talk more about the internal loan towards the end here. I just wanted to summarize where 2026, 27, 28, and 29 would be. I would say that these years, there's certainly some expenditures that are programmed in there. Each year, we're always reviewing what those 5 years look like, as well as the current year. Funding sources for these in the future are really limited at this point. There's about, I think it was or $50,000 a year that is available. So this is a conversation that we'll continue to have in 2025 for 2026 about how do we continue to fund our capital needs as part of the larger budget conversation. Fund 437 is our public facilities fund, and there's some franchise fees as well as some enterprise fund charges. And I'd say the most significant revenue source that we have shown for 2025 is the sale of property. And so that's really funding a majority of the $400,000 of expenditures planned for 2025, as well as funding out most of our improvements planned through 2028. So just looking ahead, this was kind of a list of hitting the high points. The big thing that we have out there for 2025 is the purchase of 505 Central and the demolition. The costs to make a parking lot there are actually in Fund 401. So everything there has been budgeted. But we do have some significant building upgrades coming up here in the next few years. And I would say the one thing that's not on here is the Public Works facility roof, which I've heard the ballpark of $2 million. We're probably talking about that's a borrowing activity when that comes. So there will be more discussions kind of as we go there. When we get into water, bond proceeds and user fees, so I mentioned there'd be about 5.6 to 5.7 million of bond proceeds that would be needed in water to fund kind of 2 years of projects, 2026 and 2025. I'm just showing kind of the major projects of 2025 here. And so you can see the reservoir rehab project is our most significant, or is a pretty significant project. It's the system improvements, which is what you want to see, that we have been budgeted at 1.73 million. And then what you'll see consistent with the next 3 slides is that when we're doing street construction and street overlays, we're addressing our utilities at the same time, which you would want to do. You wouldn't want to put down new pavement or make improvements and then have something break and come back and dig it all up later. So our utility funds are really set up pretty heavily on the capital side to make sure we're addressing everything at once, and that we're not just sort of letting things kind of linger, hoping they don't break, and that we'll save some money on the back end. So I feel like we have a really solid plan that's based on fundamental capital improvement planning principles. For sewer, user fees are what's going to be funding our major projects in 2025. Again, system improvements are kind of our top thing at almost 1.8 million. But you can see street construction, street overlays, those two together have us up over 800,000 of sewer fund dollars that are needed to make sure those are complete projects and not just band-aiding over some things. And then stormwater is the final one where, again, there's some stormwater construction at 725,000, but it's the street stuff that is really kind of driving about half of that $1.85 million in total capital expenditures. So that is a big run through of what I would say was months of work to put together for just a really short moment there. One of the other resolutions you have before you tonight is the fee schedule. We talked about this fairly recently, but just a reminder of some of the big changes. Sprinkler plan review fees are new. We have increased planning and zoning fees, but on the flip side, we eliminated planning and zoning escrows. And then the increases to water, sewer, and stormwater that I mentioned. When you look at the fee schedule, there are a number of things that are listed out for water, sewer, and stormwater, and those have all been adjusted by that, the percentage, or if there was a reason to adjust something by a different number, that was called out specifically in our prior presentation. There's also a resolution for the franchise fee schedule, and that is something we did review pretty recently as well. Nothing different here except for we're looking at an impact of about $30,000 less in the general fund due to the anticipated expansion of MetroNet further into the community. And so we believe that when people have some options, they will opt away from the spectrum to MetroNet. And so I realize now I forgot to include a slide, but then the final resolution 2024-251 is setting up that internal loan for $1.6 million at 2.5% interest from the general fund to Fund 431 to fund equipment for 2025 that did not have another funding source like public safety aid or local government aid. And so that is months of work in just a few minutes, and I'm happy to say that this is the culmination of what was definitely not an easy process. It was one that was a learning experience for me, and I thank you all for your patience and letting me kind of learn and asking questions to help me learn more about not only Faribault, about budgeting in Minnesota and some of those different things. And I'm quite proud of what we have here before us and how we got together there. I will say, I did point it out in the memo, typically you would have the formal budget document and a formal capital improvement plan document that would be bound in a little plastic spiral. We'd like to go away from that. And so Brad and I are going to be working on some different ways that we can communicate the same information in an easier to digest format that will hopefully be a little bit more ADA accessible on our website and easier to translate should we get the request to translate. So happy to answer any questions if you have any.
That was an enormous amount of numbers. Good thing you had a finance director. Oh, wait. So good job on your transition and not only being the city administrator, but the finance director also through this whole process. So kudos to you for all of that extra work that you were not expecting when you came on.
Yeah, I also think she did a fantastic job. Well, and with the help of directors too. I know. But without having a finance director for a good portion of time, I thought you did an excellent job. I had no idea you could talk so fast.
All right, any comments on this before we open it?
Just thanks to everybody, directors, everybody in the city's
Okay. We have a number of items that we're going to go out to for one public hearing. We're not going to go out to each one of them for a separate public hearing. We'll go out for all of them at once. If you have anything that you would like to say, you'll be able to come forward and state your name and address for the record and say your piece. But before that, I need a motion and a second to open the public hearing on all these resolutions.
So moved.
Second.
I got a motion by Councilmember Ross and seconded by Councilmember Von Sluis to open the public hearing. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are in public hearing. If you would like to state anything on all of these tax levies or fee schedules or capital improvement plan, franchise fee distribution, or the purchasing of the fire truck, please come forward, state your name and address for the record. Many people as I expected jumping for the microphone. Close the public hearing. I will take a motion and a second to close the public hearing.
So moved. Second.
Motion by Councilmember Teal, second by Councilmember Luce. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Now we got to go through these public hearings, and we do have to go through each one of them separately. So let's not be shy. Let's keep the world moving. Councilmember Ross.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to point out, Jessica, her administrator, Kinster, gave a great overview of a whole bunch of numbers, like Mayor said. But what this comes down to is on about a $225,000 house, or even a $250,000 house, what we're talking about here is about $5 per month. That is if your house did not go up in tax value. So for the citizens out there, make sure you look at your tax statement, see what the tax value of your home for this year compared to last year was. That will also comprise some of your increase. What we're talking about here is probably somewhere between $5 and $7 per month. Typical Faribault home.
We understand that you may not be selling your house this year or next year, but this is how the taxes are calculated. Any other comments before we get going on some motions? Okay, we'll Start with Resolution 2024-244, adopt the 2025 property tax levy. Motion by Councilmember Karen,
Second.
seconded by Councilmember Ross. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That one passes. Move on to Resolution 2024-245, adopt the 2025 budget and fund appropriations.
So move.
Motion by Councilmember Dumbia,
Second.
seconded by Councilmember Von Sluis. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Move on to Resolution 2024-246, adopt the 2025 Housing and Redevelopment Authority tax levy.
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Von Sluis.
Aye.
Seconded by Councilmember Teal. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes. Move on to Resolution 2024-247, adopt the 2025 Economic Development Authority tax levy.
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Ross.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Dumbia. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Move on to Resolution 2024-248, adopt the 2025 fee schedule.
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Von Sluis.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Karen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Move on to Resolution 2024-249, approve the 2025 to 2029 capital improvement plan.
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember
Second.
Teal, seconded by Councilmember Ross. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Move on to Resolution 2024-250, approve the 2025 franchise fee distribution.
So moved.
Motion by Councilmember Von Sluis,
Second.
seconded by Councilmember Karen. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That one passes. Move on to Resolution 2024-251, authorize an internal loan for the financing of the 2025 capital equipment budget and a 2023 approval purchase of a fire truck.
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Ross, seconded by Councilmember Von Sluis. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Those are all done. A lot of work for us and especially for you guys. So thank you again to all staff for helping out with that. We're moving to items for discussion. We'll start with ordinance 2024-21, approve a zoning map amendment for 739 Willow Street. First reading over to Mr. Davis.
So the item in front of you tonight is to approve a zoning map. The location of the property is here along Willow. Here, just for orientation. Here's a aerial of the property as outlined in the request by the applicant is to change the property zoning from R3, which is medium density residential, property has been used for a long time, in fact since the 1940s, as a commercial property. So we're running into a situation where 2 years after the building was built, the property was zoned as residential. So we're coming back here about 70 years later, trying to get the zoning map to acknowledge the comprehensive plan does support this particular request. It acknowledges and supports commercial context, and that the use of the property right now, sort of potential redevelopment of the property, if that were to happen, that it would be well integrated. So in summary, it meets our zoning map amendment requirements. So both
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Councilmember Ross.
Thank you, Mayor. Just looking ahead and theorizing here, what if somebody wanted to live on one level, lease out to the other level for commercial? Is that possible in this C1?
Councilmember Ross, so that would be possible under a conditional use permit. So we have something called a dwelling in conjunction with the business.
So, so if somebody wanted to do that, the owner wanted to do that, they'd come back and get a CUP.
Correct.
All right.
Okay. Any other questions?
Actually, just a comment. I've talked to several people that have been in the building, and I don't know if they could even.
Could this building be demolished? What's the worst that they could put in a C1? What would be the most largest hindrance or disruption to a neighborhood that they could do in a C1?
Mayor, I think potentially there could be like a small convenience store, but a gas station actually would not be allowed at all, even by conditional use permit for C1. So it would just be a convenience store by itself. A bookstore, auto parts, someone could bring in dry cleaning. Those are just some of the permitted by right uses.
Nothing too horribly noisy then. Or obtrusive. All right. Any other thoughts, questions, comments? If not, I would take a motion in a second to approve the zoning map amendment for this.
Mayor Bracek,
Councilmember Ross.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 2024-21.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Ross and a second by Councilmember Teal, and this is a roll call.
Member Karen,
Aye.
Booyah,
Aye.
Ross,
Aye.
Monslus,
Aye.
Spooner, Teal,
Aye.
Mayor Ratchet.
Aye. All right, that passes first reading. We'll be back in 2 weeks for that. There'll probably be a much shorter agenda too. All right, we'll move on to ordinance 2024-17, establishing regulations related to cannabis and hemp business in the city of Faribault. First reading. Over to Ms. Schletka.
Mayor and council, I don't know if I've ever been so excited to present an ordinance. After the last year and a half, we've been working on this cannabis ordinance. So back on August 25th of 2023, the city passed an interim ordinance authorizing the study and imposing a moratorium on the operation of cannabis businesses within our city. And it is set to expire on January 1st. Since the approval of that, we have all been working very hard to discuss regulation of cannabis in the city of Faribault and what regulations we want to see in place. From those discussions and work sessions over the last year, the city staff, along with all of you and our city attorney, have developed Ordinance 2024-17, which will establish the regulations related to cannabis and hemp businesses in the city of Faribault. The purpose of the ordinance is to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the city by implementing these regulations that are pursuant to statutes 342. All of the registration fees will be set in the and follow. With that, I will answer any questions.
Terrific. Thank you, Ms. Schletka. Over to Councilmember Spooner.
Ms. Schlechter, I know you'd love to pass this, but I gotta bring it up. Office of Cannabis Management is under policies regarding the lottery for the sale of it. That is now pending the process. This League of Minnesota Cities today publicized a bunch of new regulations that the Office of Cannabis Management is putting out. So we've been at this for 18 months, and I guarantee you we ain't done. So I just love the state of Minnesota. It's just classic.
No, this is very.
This is, when I read it today about from the league, I was just like, oh my.
Yes, I firmly believe that this is only the first round of
Oh.
this ordinance. So, other guidance they come up with over the next few months.
Mayor Bracek,
Councilmember Ross.
I'd like to hear if Councilmember Karen has anything to say or if she'd like to.
I would like to make a motion to approve ordinance 2024-17. Thanks, Mr. Ross.
Oh, wonderful. All right,
Second.
we got a motion by Councilmember Karen, a second by Councilmember Ross, and I believe that this gets us to where we want to be without the state, changing too much. So with that, it is a roll call, and back over to Ms. Schletka.
Councilmember Karen,
Aye.
Dumbuya,
Aye.
Ross,
Aye.
Bunslus,
Aye.
Spooner, Teal,
Aye.
Mayor Ratchek.
Aye. That also passes first reading. We'll see what happens in 2 weeks. All right. We'll move on to ordinance 2024-22, approve a zoning text amendment to allow cannabis businesses in certain zoning districts. First reading, back over to Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. So in a very similar way, we've been working on a ordinance in order to allow cannabis businesses within zoning to sort of help guide where these businesses may be within the city, in addition to the licensing. So we've talked about this quite a bit. I'm really just going to run through this. In terms of changes from last time that you all have seen this, we did actually improve the definitions. We cut out a lot that didn't really matter from the Office of Cannabis Management's model ordinance. So this is very slimmed down. The setback is still there, 250 feet from any school, and that's measured lot line to lot line. And then I put together a table that I hope it's going to be, perhaps a little bit more straightforward in terms of what is allowed and where. So if there are any questions about this particular thing, I can go back to it in order for us to take a closer look. But generally, this is what we're looking at for uses. So, for this, the comp plan does support allowing new businesses to help provide space so that they are starting here within city limits. The zoning, it does meet the criteria for zoning map amendment or a zoning text amendment in this case. The DNR has commented on what we're trying to do in terms of allowing these uses, and as long as they are very similar to other uses within that zoning district and they're permitted or conditional or not allowed in very similar ways, they really have no comment. So in general, meets the zoning text amendment criteria. It's following a comprehensive plan, and the DNR doesn't have any comments on this. Sounds pretty good to me. So we are recommending both city planning manager, myself, and the planning commission of amending our zoning ordinance to allow cannabis-based businesses.
Big thing, Mr. Davis. Any questions on this one? Fortunately, can't go in a C1. Put it in. All right. No comments or statements. I will take a motion on ordinance 2024-22.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve ordinance 2024-22.
Motion by Councilmember Karen.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Dumbia, and this is also a roll call.
Member Karen. Booyah.
Aye.
Ross.
Aye.
Hunsluse.
Aye.
Spooner. Steele.
Aye.
Mayor Ratchek.
Aye. That one passes first reading. Now to our last item of the night, Resolution 2024-256, approve a new off-sale liquor license for Indigo Dreams LLC, DBA Tipsy Corner Liquor.
Yes, so Tipsy Corner Liquor submitted an application for a new off-sale liquor license. They'll be located at 1930 2nd Avenue Northwest, which is the current liquor building. They have submitted their application, their fees, and waiting to get their insurance back. Background check will be completed. Red flags or anything that I saw bad on the application.
Terrific. That's 2 liquor stores this year getting new owners. Any comments, questions?
Mayor Ratchek.
Councilmember Ross.
I'll make a motion to approve resolution 2024-256.
Second.
Motion by Councilmember Ross, seconded by Councilmember Von Sluis to approve it. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That one passes. We have no bids tonight. Any project commission reports, announcements, or project updates? Yeah, we got coffee with the council, or what was the fun name that Brad came up with? I forget. Conversations with the council? I don't know.
Let's talk politics.
Let's talk politics. That was it. Thank you. December 14th at 1 o'clock, and that'll be in the Great Hall at the library on the back side. So we'll be able to see the remodeling that's going on in process. We did approve a change order tonight because those walls are made of soft materials and not adequate for hanging TVs and other equipment. So, but we'll be able to see some of the progress that's going on in there on Saturday. So I hope people join us at 1 o'clock. Should have some coffee there. I haven't arranged that yet, but otherwise bring your own cup. So, just Administrator Kinzer.
Only because I fear you will not mention it. Next Tuesday at 5 p.m. Is it here?
4.
Or 4:30? Oh, Okay, 4:30 here in City Council chambers. We will be having a thank you reception for Mayor Voracek for his service to the city of Faribault and for Councilmember Karen in her service. And so this is a public reception. Everybody is invited, and we encourage you all to attend.
Heather's in charge of that one. I'm sure she's already got the punch lined up. Oh, that's a surprise. All right. Any other comments? Councilmember Councilors?
Winterfest was a great success, thanks to all the organizers. There was a huge crowd in the parade.
Yeah, the weather was perfect on Saturday. So the fireworks were good and got lots of compliments on those. So that's a tradition that I think is going to continue. So.
Thursday night is our Boards and Commission annual thank you to everybody that's been on it. And a shout out to anybody listening. If you're interested.
Absolutely, there's all kinds of opportunities for people to get involved. Some of those are only 6-year terms, so and there's some that are yearly. Right, and then Thursday is stakeholders meeting for Riverbend Nature Center. So they're constantly looking at different funding options and trying to get more people involved up there. So if you see some unfamiliar faces in town, that's what's going on. So they're doing another bus tour. So learning about Faribault. All right, I think that's all we got. Okay, all right, with that, I would take a motion and a second to adjourn.
So move.
Motion by Councilmember Dumbia,
Second.
seconded by Councilmember Teal. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.